right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. I'm a senior program manager here at Microsoft inside of Cloud and AI. And basically, I spend the vast majority of my day, basically all of my day, focused in on students and on Azure. And today, I'm here to talk about one of my all-time favorite web platforms, and that's this little thing called Django. Now, what I want to do before I get into this is highlight the little rundown over there on the right-hand side. That's what we're going to wind up going through. That's partly there for you, so that way you can see where it is that we're going to be going. And it's also, quite frankly, partly there for me, so then that way I don't wind up forgetting a step. Glad to see that my audio and video is all good. That's actually great to hear. Which leads me to this other part, which is don't be afraid to ask questions. I am going to wind up moving a little bit quickly through some of this content, but please do ask questions. I will do my absolute best to go ahead and answer them. And you'll also notice that we've got Megan that's here as well. She can also help you out. So, let's talk a little bit about Django. So what is Django? Well, sort of like the little tagline there says, Django makes it easier to build web apps more quickly and with less code. And what I want to highlight here is that Django is really built for one of the most common types of web apps that you're going to come across in your development lifetime, and that's what's known as a CRUD application. And I'm not making a judgment on your app when I say that, but rather I'm highlighting that abbreviation of create, retrieve, update, and delete. That's what CRUD is all about. And what you're going to notice is that oftentimes what you're looking to do is create some form of a front end, quite frequently a web front end, to some sort of a back-end database that when you think about, like just trying to manage items, whatever it might be, that quite frequently that's really what we're going to be looking to do. And that's really where Django shines. So what I'm actually going to do over the next 57 minutes here is build a fully functional Django application. I'm going to do my basic installation. I'm going to do Hello World, because of course I would do Hello World. I'm going to create a couple of objects for a mock conference that we're going to be doing. And I'm going to then show off how the ORM, the Object Relational Object Relational Manager works to give us the ability to interact with a database. And then we're going to see how we can, with just a little bit of code, create a front-end experience for our users. And then we'll go ahead and deploy it out. There was a question that came through about being new to Python. Is there a session earlier today? Is it recorded? It is. And I also want to highlight, and Megan, I'm going to sort of put you on the spot behind the scenes here, but there is a full Intro to Python series that myself and a friend of mine, Susan Ibach, did on YouTube that you can go check out as well. I don't know if, Megan, if you happen to have that at the ready or not, but if you do, if you want to go ahead and share that, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at the beginnings of our demo. Now, what I want to highlight here is the fact that I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I've done nothing as far as initial setup here. So everything that we're going to be putting into our site, we're going to be putting into our site live right here. I'm just going to do it all through Visual Studio Code. There's nothing fancy that's here. You might notice, for those of you that are slightly more observant, that I'm using a little thing called WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux, which I'm a huge fan of because it gives me the ability to use Linux right here on my Windows system. And I find that when you're using something like Python, which is really geared towards Linux, that it just gives you a better experience if you're working with Linux. So I really like WSL for that exact reason. So I'm going to go ahead and start doing a little bit of kind of normal Python setup here. I'm going to set up my virtual environment. Oops, bin activate, just like that. Now this is sort of like stock standard Python here. There's nothing that's overly out of the ordinary here. Everything that I'm doing here, though, could also very easily be done on Windows. Like the only thing that's going to wind up changing if you're working on Windows versus on Linux is the fact that I'm going to wind up simply doing Python, tick m, vem, venv, and then my activate is just going to be slightly different. It would wind up being venv scripts activate. But otherwise, everything is going to be the exact same. So the question there of, am I going to do Django and Python on Windows? There isn't necessarily a, hey, this will only work on Windows or this will only work on Linux. Everything that I'm doing here will work on Windows. It's just this part right here that will be a little bit different. If you go check out the Django project website, you can actually see how to do the installation on Windows, and that's really going to be the only difference here. Okay. Let me set up a real quick requirements file here. And inside of your requirements file, what you do is you list off all of the packages that you're going to need. So we're obviously going to need Django, since we're doing Django. That one kind of makes sense. We're also going to need a little helper called .env, and this is going to help us manage our environmental variables. So that way I don't have to worry about like setting variables or anything like that. We'll be able to just do that with a .env file. And then we're also going to need a little thing called white noise. And this is going to be for serving static files. Now these bottom two here, for right now, just ignore them. I'm doing this all in one shot just to make my life a little bit easier, but the only thing that's actually important here on this screen is just Django. That's the only thing that matters. If that's all that you focus in on, then that's perfect. That's really all that I need here. So let me go ahead and install that. So pip3 install our requirements.txt, and this will go ahead and do its thing. Should be pretty quick. Cool, just like that, I've now installed everything. Now, there's a friend of mine that likes to say, we're not launching rockets here. And this is something that he first said many years ago. And it stuck with me to this very day because it really is one of the most important concepts I think every developer needs to learn, which is whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has already done it. Like, we're not going out, we're not breaking new ground, we're not launching rockets. And so whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has already done. And if somebody else has already done it, chances are there's already a blog post explaining how to do it, or there's some great frameworks and projects and so forth that you can take advantage of. And that's exactly what we're going to see right here with Django, is that there's a lot of great tooling that's built right in for us. So for example, one of the things that everybody needs to do is to bootstrap a site. So if you think about something like Express, for example, that there's a lot of like files and code and so forth that I need to create just to get a basic Express site up and running. And this is why a tool like Yeoman exists. So that way it will just automatically create those root files for me. Well, in Django, that's actually already there. It's inside of this great little tool. I'm just going to clear my screen here. Inside of this great little tool called Django Admin. And there's two main commands inside of here that we're going to use. The first is going to be start project. And I'm going to give this a basic name of demo because I'm very creative. And that last little dot at the end there is going to tell it to create it inside of the current directory. So what's a project, you might ask? Well, a project is going to be the central entry point for our website. And everything that we're going to be doing is going to be accessed through this site. And if we take a look at what happened here, you may notice that it automatically created a little manage.py file for us, and it automatically created this little demo folder for us as well. And if I open up manage.py, what you're going to notice inside of here is that it's got all of the core code to start my server, and then one main line right here where it's going to be loading up everything from this settings file. Now I'm going to go look at that settings file in just a moment, but I want to make sure that I load up our .env file. And I'm going to do that by saying from .env import load .env and load.env. Okay, and this is giving me a little error message here because it didn't pick up my virtual environment. There we go. And I think there's an underscore that I'm missing there. There we go. Okay. Yeah, one great thing about the Python extension inside of Visual Studio Code is it will do a fantastic job of figuring out what's going on and highlighting your mistakes there. And so that was actually how I knew that, that I had a little typo here, that I had those little blue squigglies. That is, in fact, the technical term. And that was letting me know, hey, something's not quite right here. So just needed an underscore, and now everything looks good. Again, don't worry too much about that. I'm honestly just doing that right now because otherwise I'm going to forget about it a little bit later. Let's open up this settings file here. So this settings file, as you might expect, is going to be a whole host of different settings. There's a secret key inside of here that we should absolutely get out of there, which we will a little bit later. There's allowed hosts, and this is basically where we can run our website from. We've got our installed apps, which we'll go in and take a look at in just a little bit. We've got our middleware, which is going to handle like all the additional behind the scenes things that need to happen with our site, things like managing our session, things like handling authentication. We also, if I keep on scrolling down here, have the ability to set up a database. You're going to notice by default it's going to use SQLite, which is just fine for me. I'm going to work with that. And you'll also notice we can even set up different password validators. We can set up our language codes. We can set up the static URL for static files, etc. So there's an awful lot of configuration that's available to us right here. And you'll notice that this automatically set up a whole bunch of defaults for us. So that's what that start project did for us. But that's not where our custom code is really going to reside. I mean, yeah, we're going to go in and update a few things inside of there. But the bulk of our code is actually going to be somewhere else. The bulk of our code is going to be inside of what's known as an app. So I'm going to create an app, and I'm going to name this conference. Because again, I'm going to create a kind of a very simple conference, if you will. Now, this app right here is going to be our, where our code, the bulk of our code, is going to exist. This is where we're going to create all of our HTML. This is going to be where we're going to create our models, etc. All of that's going to go right inside of there. And if we take a look at the folder structure, where's my mouse? There it is. If we take a look at the folder structure that we now have inside of Conference, you're going to notice that we have things like models. And this is where our data is going to wind up being structured. We have things like tests. So that way, if we want to go in and do unit testing, which you absolutely should, all that's going to go inside of there. We're going to have our views, and this is going to determine what it is that's going to be run when our user starts to make requests. We're going to have our admin site, which is going to give us a fantastic little behind the scenes site. This is probably right here, my favorite feature inside of Django, and I'll talk about why in a couple of minutes. And then last but not least is this apps.py file, and this is now going to become the root to our app. Now you're going to notice right here this little name here of conference config. Well, remember back over here on our settings.py? Remember right here that we had installed apps, and we've got things like auth, and we've got things like session, and we've got things like admin. Well, one of the things that needs to be registered inside of here is that conference config class that's right over here. So that conference.config, or that conference config rather, that needs to be registered inside of our installed apps. This is basically telling Django, hey, I've got an app here. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at that and you're going, hey, wait a minute, you created it. Why do you have to tell Django that it's there? Well, you might actually run into scenarios where maybe I've got slightly different apps for staging and production, and we don't just want to necessarily assume that because there's a folder there that Django is now going to start running the code that's inside of there. So it's not a big deal. You just have to remember to go back and update that. Okay, cool. So now that I've done that, let's turn our attention to views. Now, with our views, what we can do is determine what functions it is that we want to now execute when a user makes a request. So for example, when you go to Microsoft.com or Amazon.com to make purchases, or ESPN.com to start looking up sports scores, or whatever it is, you're going to make different requests on that site by setting up some sort of a URL. And what's going to happen is that server is going to look at that URL and try to figure out, hey, what is it that this person is asking for? And the way that it's going to then in turn fulfill that request is by running some bit of code. So the TLDR version of that is when you set up a URL, behind the scenes, the website is going to run some bit of code. So what we need to do as a developer is we need to set up the code that we're going to have run. And we also need to say, hey, when the user makes this request, this is the code that I now want you to run. So let's set up that function first here. So I'm going to say def index. So just creating a normal Python function here. And then I'm going to say return HTTP response and hello world. So that way it's now an official programming demo. Now, as I highlighted, we do need to indicate where it is that we want, what URL it is that we want to respond to. And the way that we're going to set this up is by setting up a new urls.py file. Now, there's a couple of things in here that are just going to be based on convention. So let me, from Django URLs, import path, and I'm going to say app. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to type, and then I'll go ahead and then explain what it is that's going on here. Path, and then, whoops. There we go. That looks better. Views index and name equals index. Okay, cool. All right. So what's going on? Glad you asked. So here's what's happening. There's a couple of different convention things that we're going to be putting into this url.py file. The first is going to be the name of our application. Now, you might be noticing down below that as I set up a new path here, more on that in just a second here, that I'm giving each one a name, and you might be wondering, hey, wait, where does this name have to be unique? Where's this going to come into play, etc.? I'm going to talk about where it's going to come into play a little bit later, but for right now, where it needs to be unique is to the name of our application. Now, you can actually use this if you wanted to start creating different blocks of URLs. That if you think about a website, there's a lot of different URLs and different requests that you might want to be able to respond to. And so it's very common to have a rather complex routing table. So to try and manage that and to try and break that down, you might be setting up multiple URL files and multiple objects and things like that. So you can start to make sure that you're not running into naming conflicts and so forth by setting up different app names. So my app name and my URL pattern, both of those are just simply going to be conventions. Okay. Last thing then that I want to mention is my path. You're going to notice that's going to be the empty string here. So that's basically going to be when somebody goes to my root site, what do I want them to do? Well, I want them to go to that little index function, which we created right over here. So when somebody just goes to the root, they're going to, let's see, there we go. When somebody goes to the root, they're going to go to that little index right there. So those two will line up for me. And then last but not least is going to be that name. Cool. Now, the one last little catch that I'm going to have is, unfortunately, I need to register that inside of our project. And one thing that I really love about Django is that they give you a lot of great documentation. So if you're looking at this and going, okay, Christopher, I don't quite get this, and that's totally cool. I'm absolutely moving a little fast through this. There's a lot of great information that's available inside of the file itself. Or if you go take a look at the website, you're going to notice there's a lot of great documentation that's available inside of here. And this tutorial, by the way, is probably one of the best tutorials that I think I've ever seen, especially in the open source world. That it really walks you through how to go in and set up a Django application. I just love that little tutorial there. Okay, anyway, back over here, let's go ahead and now register everything. So I'm going to do this by setting up an include, and then I'm going to say path. When you set the root directory, where I want you to go to is to that conference URLs file that we just created. All right. Now, I want to launch my website. Whoops, let's make sure that I'm showing my editor here. So yeah, so I opened up the root inside of demo, that URLs py file, added that little bit of code in right there. And by the way, I want to highlight the fact that you can see all the code that I'm working on right here, so you don't have to just read it from my screen. There we go. Okay, back over here. So I've added that in, and so now I'm ready to run my site. And I can do that through that manage.py file. So I'm going to say manage py, I'm going to say run server. And then now it's going to give me my little browser. And if I open this up, sure enough, I've got hello world. All right. Now, you might be looking at that and you might be thinking to yourself, gosh, Christopher, that was near 25 minutes just to get to hello world. It seems like an awful lot of work just to get to hello world. And you know, you're right. So obviously this isn't really where we want to go with Django. Okay, well then where should we be going with Django? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's really where we should be going with Django. And that is into this little models.py file. If you've ever played around with, say, Link Entity Framework in .NET, or if you've played around with, say, Mongoose in Node World, you're familiar with a little thing known as an ORM, or Object Relational Mapper. I think I said manager earlier. Mapper is actually the right word. That's all right. By the way, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Here for you, not the other way around. So when you're using a tool like Entity Framework or Mongoose, what you do is you define, hey, this is what I want my data to look like. So what I want my data to look like is this, is I want a speaker. And I want it to be a model. And my speaker is going to have a name. And that name is going to be a char field. So single line text. And I want this to have a max length of, let's say, 50. And I don't want it to be blank. Cool. So what I've done in this one simple line of code is I've identified, or 2 lines of code, is I've identified I want a model now named speaker, and I've defined a property of that called a name. Well, my speaker is going to have presentations. And my presentation is going to have a title. Let's set with a max length of 100, and let's say blank equals false. Going to be an abstract to describe what it is. So we'll say models text field allowing us to go with a bigger amount of text there. And we'll say maybe max length of 1,000. People like to talk, like myself. And we'll go ahead and say blank equals false. And then last but not least, we need a speaker. Whoops, lowercase s Christopher, there we go. Whoops, not cascade, protect. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. So let's think about this object structure that we've got here. So what we've got is we have a presentation that's going to be delivered by a speaker. So this is going to be a one-to-many relationship. One speaker to many presentations. And in database terms, that presentation then would have a foreign key. It's going to point back to the primary. It's going to point back to there. It's going to have that foreign key of speaker. And so just like this, I've now created a relationship between presentation and speaker. And I've also set it up so that if you try to delete a speaker that has a presentation, we're not going to let that happen. Okay. Now, how can I use that? Remember again, we're not launching rockets. So eventually this is going to wind up inside of a database, right? Well, what I want to be able to do is set up that database. I want to take all of this, my speaker, my presentation, and I want to convert that into SQL. And the way that I can do that in Django is by using what are known as migrations. A migration will allow me to take whatever objects it is that I've created here and update that in the database. So I'm going to say Python 3, manage.py, make migrations. And so that's now going to look at all my code and go, hey, I'm seeing a brand new speaker here. I'm seeing a brand new presentation here. Let me set up the appropriate SQL for that. Cool. Well, now what I want to do is I want to apply that to my database. So I can do that by saying Python 3 manage.py. Again, manage.py is my entry. And I'm going to say migrate. Now, what did this do behind the scenes? Well, what this did for me behind the scenes is it created this little SQLite file. Now, the reason that it created the SQLite file is because that was what my database was set to do. It's set to use SQLite. Now, if you wanted to use, say, SQL, MySQL, Postgres, whatever, you could absolutely do that. You just need to go in and set the appropriate engine and update a couple of options inside of there, set up your credentials, all that good stuff. And you can manage that type of a database the exact same way that I'm managing this. And this now becomes a full-blown ORM, a full-blown object relational mapper. So through code, I could actually now create a speaker, I could create a presentation, whatever it is. So let's actually just set up a shell here, Python manage.py shell. And let's go grab from conference models, let's go grab that speaker and the presentation. And whoops, make sure that I've got this. Cool. All right, I'm actually going to pause right here because it's a great question, which is, I appreciate talking about this. Is it necessary to specify the max length? Is it necessary to understand SQL? I'm going to go backwards here. If you understand SQL, if you understand a database, it is going to make it a little bit easier to work inside of the that model syntax. It's not required. You don't need a real in-depth knowledge, but it's just going to make it a little bit easier. So that way, when we start talking about things like foreign keys and so forth, you're not going, I don't know what those are. So it does certainly make it easier. The next question is it necessary to specify the max length? It's not, but it gives you the ability to then do validation just right there. So now nobody's going to be able to set a max length of longer than 50 for the name and 100 for a title. Okay. So let's come back over here. Let me set up a speaker. Speaker equals speaker, and I'm going to say name equals Christopher, just like this. And I'm going to say speaker.save. Now, you might be wondering, where did save come from? Well, save came from this little model. It came from the Django ORM. So when I run these two lines of code right here, what happened behind the scenes inside of the SQLite file is it now created a brand new entry inside of a speaker table with the name of Christopher. And if I wanted to, I could actually go load that up. So I could go in and say something like speaker, objects, all. And this is again using that Django ORM to go get me everything. So I could actually then load up an individual speaker by saying get, and then I can go ahead and print out the name, for example, like that. Now, here's what I want you to focus in on. First of all, is the fact that this objects is going to be my entry point into the Django ORM. So basically from this point, I'm now going to be making queries. And this is a little similar to what you might see in Mongoose. If you were using this with, say, Entity Framework, then this would be done slightly differently. But it's all kind of that same relative concept, where I'm now going to use some bit of code to go access data. And you would actually notice that you've got the ability to do like filters, to go grab an individual item, and then right here is my query where I'm saying ID equals 1. Now I could actually say like name equals Christopher. That would work as well. And you might be thinking, well, how do you know that the ID was 1? Well, I'm sort of cheating here. Empty database. I created an item. Counting in databases starts at 1. So that first item is going to be 1. And I can even continue forward into doing something like this. I could say presentation equals presentation, title equals Django 101, and then abstract equals Django is cool. I could say presentation speaker equals that speaker that I loaded up, and then say presentation.save. Now, there's so much coolness that's going on right here that one really big thing that needs to happen behind the scenes is that we need to go in and set up that presentation record. We need to make sure that a speaker is there, etc. Like there's a lot that's actually going on. And fortunately, the Django worm takes care of all of this for me. Just does it all, which is fantastic. It's wonderful. And what the Django worm and Django itself also does for me is this really cool thing right here. I'm going to, first of all, create a user. Let me do that. Python manage.py. I'm going to create a super user. Now, a super user is basically like an admin. And you might be wondering, where did that come from? Well, again, it's the beauty and magic of Django. I didn't write any code for this. Django had this built in for me. If you remember back to our little settings, we saw a little bit about this. That we saw things like auth. We saw things like admin. We saw things like password validators. All that's baked in. There's nothing that I need to do to set this up. I can just take advantage of it. So I'm now going to create a user in my site. Specify an email address. My password. And now I've created that. And I'm going to be able to use that to log into an admin site that I'm going to register right here. Okay. 2 lines of code, well, technically 3. Here's what I did. In Python terms, I went, hey, I want everything from that models.py file. And in Django terms, I said, do me a favor. Create for me a presentation page and a speaker page. So I'm going to save this. And now I'm going to go back to my browser. And I'm going to log in to the admin page. I started with a blank folder here. There's nothing on my sleeves except for my arms. All of this is the magic of Django. All of this was created for me because I said start project and because of those couple of lines of code right there. So now I'm going to be able to log in with Geek Trainer, my password, and now, okay. And now I'm going to open up my presentations. I'm going to open up presentation object 1, more on that in just a second here. And here's everything that I set up before. There's my little Django 101. There's my little abstract of Django is cool. If I go backwards and open up my speakers and open up speaker object 1, you're going to notice that sure enough, there's Christopher. This is now a fully functional admin site on top of my application. So I could go in and start creating brand new users. I could go in and start setting up all sorts of permissions here. Again, I didn't create any of this. Django did this for me. Now, the one little problem that I do have here, let's go back home to open back up presentations, is this presentation object 1. I'd like that to be a little bit better. Okay, I can do that. So let's go back to code here. Let's open up our models py. And if you're familiar with Python, then you might know that one of the things that you can do is you can set up a toString function, or __str in Python. And so now what I could do is I could say, hey, just return self.name. So now when somebody prints it out and they don't say, hey, this is what I want it to look like, it's just automatically going to give me back the name. And I could do the same thing back here with my title. So I'm going to say define, hold please, return self title, hit save. And now let me come back over here to my admin site, and let's just hit refresh. And now, if I hit refresh, there we go. Now you're going to notice it's saying Django 1. And now you're going to notice that when I hit the little drop down here, now it's showing speaker. And the reason that it's doing all of that is because I added in those string functions here. And when you get deeper into Django, what you're going to start to notice is that there's a lot of power right here on this screen. So you can add a lot of functionality just by coming in here and saying, hey, this is how I want you to behave, and hey, this is how I want you to behave. Which is pretty cool. At least I think it's cool. Okay. Now, I also do want to highlight the fact that through this admin tool, I could also go in and start creating my own items. So for example, Bootstrap is still cool because really, Bootstrap is in fact still cool. Trust me on this one. And so now, isn't that? So now I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I could actually hit save and add another. And voila, it's now going to give me that blank form, but we'll have saved that behind the scenes. Okay. Now the thing about the admin page is it's built for, well, internal users. What about for external users? I'm glad you asked. So for external users, what we want to do is we want to add in the barest minimum amount of code. Again, we're not launching rockets here. Whatever it is that we've done, somebody else has already done. And when you think about the normal flow for a CRUD application, create, retrieve, update, delete, we always want to do the same basic things. We want to be able to list items. We want to be able to get the details for an item. We want to be able to add items, edit items, and delete items. This is true universally. So how about we go ahead and let Django do a lot of the heavy lifting for us? So what we're going to take advantage of first is these cool little generic views. I think I've got enough time to get to detail view. Yeah, I've got enough time. We'll find out. Okay. So I'm going to take advantage of these generic views. These generic views are built for this exact bit of functionality that I'm talking about. These common everyday CRUD application scenarios. So what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to create a list of items, and I want to be able to set up a detail view. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to get rid of that old index, and I'm going to create a brand new one. And I'm going to create this as a class of index view, and I'm going to import in from list view. And I'm going to set up two things here. The first is going to be the context object name. More about that in a couple of minutes. And then the next thing is going to be this little get query set. What get query set is going to allow me to do is indicate the code to go load whatever it is that we want to display out to the user. And in my case, I just want to display all the presentations. So I'm just going to go ahead and say from models import our presentation. So on my index, this is going to be return presentation objects all. Normally I wouldn't recommend displaying all, but yeah, unfortunately we don't have a bot. I've been at it for 46 minutes. So anyway, normally I wouldn't suggest just returning all objects, but in my case, I'm going to go ahead and just display them all because I've only got just a couple here. Let me update my my show rundown here. Boom, there we go, and this is where we are. Okay, back over here. Cool. So what this is going to do is this is going to go grab all of my objects for me, and it's actually going to put them into an item called presentations. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to create a new folder called templates, a new folder called conference, and a new file called presentation list.html. Now, this is convention. That's how I know to create all of that. That's all just Django convention. So I'm going to add in a bit of HTML, my head, my title, Contoso conference, and then my body lies over the ocean. H1, welcome to Contoso conference. H2, check out our presentations. And okay, so here's, and welcome to everybody from Visual Studio. Here's what we're going to do here. What we're going to do is loop through all of our presentations. And I'm going to do this with a syntax that should be oddly familiar if you've done almost anything, I think, with some sort of like inline HTML code here. So I'm going to say for presentation in presentations. And you might be wondering, well, where in the world did presentations come from? I'm so glad that you asked. That came from right here. So let's go ahead and now li, boom, boom, presentation title, boom, boom, and for cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. And now, if I've done everything correct, which I'll give myself an 80% chance at that. Let's all find out together here. Oh, nope, I forgot one thing. Dang it. I need to tell it to use that new thing that I just created. Okay. Views, index view, as view, boom, boom. Okay. Give me 1 second here. Talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a topic. There we go. The Industrial Revolution was neither industrial nor a revolution. Discuss. Okay. Back over here, let's try this again. There we go. Cool. So now, what I want you to notice here is that with just that little bit of code and that little bit of HTML, it's now pulling all the items out of my database and displaying all of that out. Isn't that cool? I love that. So yeah, like I had to write a little bit of HTML, but really, if you get right down to it, this right here, after creating my models, was all the code that I had to set up. And I can even actually go one step further here, and this is probably even cooler, is my detail view. I'm going to do the same thing here, set my contact object name, presentation, and then I'm going to go ahead and set the model to be, in my case, presentation. Okay. Now, I want you to notice here that I'm not writing any code to access the ORM. I'm not doing anything like that. What I am going to do, though, is inside of my URLs, I'm now going to add in a brand new path, and I'm going to do a little bit of like regular expression business here, where I'm going to say, hey, I'm looking for an integer, and when you see an integer, assign that to a variable of, oh, thank you. When you see an integer, assign that to a variable of primary key. And let me come back over here real quick to my views. I want to make sure that I show that code. Thanks for calling that out. Right here, you're going to notice here's my new detail view. Set up my context object name just like I did before, and I just set my model. Okay, again, no code to go access the database. In my URLs pie, here's my little path, a little bit of regular expression magic. Go pick out the integer and assign that to a variable called pk. Then I'm going to go ahead and say views, detail view as view, and then my name is going to be index. Whoops, index, detail. Cool. All right, back over here. Here's my little presentation. Here's that little list item that I was displaying. And a question came through about, hey, what's all this? If you go check out the Django website, it will break this down a little bit more, but in 10 seconds or less, the curly % is indicating, hey, I'm gonna run like a little bit of code. And in the curly, what that's gonna indicate is whatever's here, just print it out on the screen. Okay. So I'm going to add in a little bit of anchor text here. And boom, I want this to look like this. Okay. Boom, boom, URL. Now, what this little built-in URL function is going to do for me is it's going to do magic. It's going to automatically create a URL for me. Now, what it wants to know, first up, is it wants to know where to point to. And so if you remember back over here on my URLs, I gave it an app name of conference, and then I gave this a name of detail. So that's how I'm going to point to that. So I'm going to say conference detail. So that's where that's coming from. Now, if you remember on detail, it needs one piece of information. It needs to know what's the primary key. That's that first parameter. And so now, let me come back over here and add that in. I'm going to say presentation ID. Let's just make that fit all onto one screen. There we go. Okay. So now let me save this. And again, if I've done everything right, which I'll give myself about an 80% chance of, and I hit refresh over here, now you're going to notice that all of these are lit up as links. Now I'm going to click one of these links and it's going to fail. But here's what I want you to notice on the link. I want you to notice right up here that it's already got in that / of 2. In fact, you can see, hey, you know, I need something here. Uh-oh. As view takes 1 position of 2 we're given. I don't know why it's giving me that error message. Uh-oh. No. All right, I'm gonna just keep moving here. It wasn't the error message I was expecting. But I'm pretty sure my code is right. So just give me 1 second here. I'm just gonna make my life a little easier. I do have from earlier. Let me just do a real quick copy and paste. Okay, so this is now my this is now my my detail page. Let me save this. I want to hit refresh. As view takes 1 positional, but it doesn't. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Here we go. Bloop, there we go. Okay. See, I told you there was always a chance of me making a mistake here. Okay, cool. So now I'm gonna go ahead and save this. Yeah, there we go. Now I'm gonna go ahead and save this. Now let's go back over here to my browser. It's still showing an error message. That's all right, we're gonna fix that. So now those links are all operational. So now what you're gonna notice here is now when I click on that little one, there is my Django 101. Django is cool, and then the speaker name of Christopher. I could go in and maybe make this a little bit fancier here. Maybe I could go back over to my code and maybe say something like title, something like abstract, something like presenter, just like that. Okay, cool. So now, here's what I want you to notice is now that I've got that set up, let me go back to my browser. Let me hit one of those little links, and now you're going to notice that that it's updated. Okay. So we are basically right at time. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to show off how to deploy this out to Azure, and I'm going to talk about that in a second here. But I have to admit, as I'm looking through the chat, I was not expecting a whole conversation about code editors. In any event, there's a question here, is there a CMS platform on Python? There is. And in fact, one thing that's worth highlighting here is you could use Django as a bit of a CMS content management system. And the first demo actually that it walks you through is going in and setting up like a blog with Django. So you could absolutely go ahead and use this as that. Okay, here's the takeaway from all of this. The takeaway from all of this is really the fact that with just a little bit of code, I'm able to create a fully functional website that in 59 minutes here, while talking, while babbling, and while taking some time to do an initial introduction, I created a fully functional website. That what I've got inside of my code is just a couple entries for my models. I've got the couple entries for my URLs. I've got just a little bit of code here to go interact with my data. And then voila, I've got a full website here. Data driven. So I can go in, hit my little links, get my details, And this is really, I think, the coup de grace, I've got a full admin site. All right there. Now, I want to close by saying two real quick things. Number one is the fact that you can absolutely run all of this in Azure. That one question I get asked quite frequently is, hey, can you only do .NET in Azure? And the answer is no, that in fact more Linux is run on Azure than Windows. You can absolutely run all of this on Azure. There's a few steps to walk through to do the deployment, because of course there is, but you can absolutely run this in Azure. So I want to make sure that I highlight this. The second thing that I want to highlight is I'm going to be back here on Thursday morning, 9 a.m. Pacific time, spending 2 hours on Django. And that's going to be a little bit more kind of free form. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into what it is that we've built. Try to make things maybe look a little bit prettier. Go in and take a little bit deeper look at the ORM and how we can work through that. And then also go in and do the deployment. So if you like what you've seen here, then by all means, go ahead and come on back on Thursday and check all of this out. The question was, is there a GitHub repository for all of this? The answer is absolutely. You can see all of that right inside of Reactors Online. Basically, all of the code that I did here is available inside of that repository. It's a couple of slight differences, but I'll go in and merge all of that together and make sure that all of those are the same. There's a question of, do I have any social media accounts that I follow or resources that I have for Django? Yeah. So the first thing that I want to highlight is the Django website itself. I love the Django website. Like it really is really well documented and does, I think, a fantastic job of getting you up and running inside of Django. There's another one. Here we go. There's another great one called Django Packages. Again, we're not launching rockets here. That whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else has already done. And that's certainly true inside of Django. And what's great about this little website here is it shows you everything that basically anybody's ever built that's marked it as, hey, this is for Django. And what I also really like about this is, for example, like somebody was asking about, say, CMS, is that if I hit CMS here, that this will go ahead and show me all sorts of projects for CMS. So it will show me things like where the source code is. It will show me when the last update was. It will show me the number of people, at least through here, that are using it, etc. So this right here is definitely my probably my favorite go-to resource for Django. Cool. Well, with that, I've run a couple of minutes over. I want to thank everybody who connected today. Hopefully you picked something up on Django. Please do keep checking back on the Microsoft Developer Twitch channel. We are doing a whole bunch of new content. I'll be back here again on Thursday doing a lot of the same demo, but I'll be able to spend a lot more time and kind of meander a little bit more. So please do join on Thursday. Asking me to do time zone math there. Yes, that would be 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and I think 6 a.m. Hawaiian time. Don't quote me on the Hawaiian time there. But in any event, yeah, I'm going to be back here on Thursday, and check out the GitHub repository and our YouTube channel as well. Let me throw both of those in. Yes, aloha. And yeah, So thanks again to everybody who's connected. Enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, day, night, wherever in the world you happen to be. Thanks again.